Hi, my name is Salena Wells and I am with LifeGuard. I'll tell you a little bit about myself so that I'm not a stranger, and then about the program, the organization that I work for, and we'll get started with our parent workshop. So, as I said, my name is Salena Wells. I grew up about an hour north of Austin in Fort Hood, Texas, where I went to elementary school. After that, I moved around the state and ended up at 13 different schools before I got to college. The reason that I moved around so much is that my mother is actually someone who is in the military. And so moving around so much in my young childhood, I realized that I not only needed my neighbors, but I liked helping them as well because birthday parties and babysitting didn't happen with aunts, uncles, and cousins. It happens with strangers. This led me to get a bachelor's degree in family and human services and to go on helping people later on in life. But while I was in college, I realized that I was tired of working so hard. And so I took a break. After taking that break from working hard and actually going to work, I realized that making money wasn't all there was that I wanted to do. And so, sometime around my mid 20s, I got really, really sick. And the money was gone because I had to spend it all on hospital bills. I looked at my life again and I said, okay, now that the money is gone and it's no longer your goal or object, what do you want to do with your life? And so I decided to help people in a very specific way. The way that I get to help people is by encouraging, educating, and empowering young people to make healthy choices with their life, which is something I'm super excited about being able to do. So that's some of my background. Before being the program director for LifeGuard, I also worked in early childhood education as well as after school programming, which then led me to here. So prior to being the program director, I was a staff educator working inside of the classroom with students, as well as an assistant director doing some of the behind the scenes things before landing right here in the spot that I am in today. And so that's a little bit about me. In regards to our program, LifeGuard is the preventative education program of The Source. The Source Austin is a women's health clinic that provides free and low cost reproductive health services to underserved women. So we'll go ahead and get started with the rest of the presentation in regards to why you are actually tuning in today. So, who are we? LifeGuard is a sexual risk avoidance education preventative program. We serve about 15,000 students on average, and we are in about 8 different school districts around the Central Texas area. We were started in 1989 by our host program, The Source, and we employ professionally trained and college educated speakers. So everyone that is in the classroom is someone who has background knowledge and has been professionally trained by us. They may go through 40 hours of training prior to being in the classroom and being able to present on all of our different grade levels. So, what is our mission? Our mission is to equip students and parents with medically accurate information and practical tools to help students delay sexual activity and build healthy boundaries. We do this by hosting parent workshops. We also offer a parent education curriculum. If someone is interested in that, we have the ability to do that. Medically accurate means that our curriculum goes through an annual update to make sure that our statistics are the most current statistics available. We primarily use the CDC as a resource for this. In regards to building healthy relationships, that includes platonic relationships. After going through our curriculum, students are able to set healthy boundaries to be able to recognize how they show affection and how they receive affection from those important people in their lifetime. Our vision is to be the go-to source for sexual risk avoidance education in Texas, making optimal sexual health attainable for every student we encounter. But what is optimal sexual health? Optimal sexual health refers to the best possible outcome from any individual. And we believe that the best possible outcome is one in which there is the least chance of a sexual risk involved. And we see that happen in a long-term committed relationship such as marriage. Our values as a program are what we call ACE PAR. We value medical accuracy, and that's how we communicate. We also value authenticity, and so all of our speakers are encouraged to share stories with the students inside of the classroom. Another value that we have is compassion. No matter who we serve, we're here for all students to be able to make the best choices. And we operate in a way that empowers both students and parents to make their own decisions. And we partner with communities, with parents and community organizations to provide this program in the classroom. The second to last value that we have, but definitely not last in terms of priority, is respect. No matter a student's experiences, background, or identity, we respect their future and their ability to make those decisions for themselves. Lastly, our value is relevance. We like to speak to where students are today, making sure that with the medically accurate information that we provide, we do have a pulse on what's going on with students and what is most relevant to them. Which brings us to talking about sexual risk avoidance education. SRA or SRAE is what the acronym would turn out to. This is information and skills designed to help teens refrain from sexual activity in order to prevent any of the possible consequences of sex. And we look at sex from a holistic perspective. You'll learn more about that when we get into the holistic aspects of sex. In terms of SRA, there is also another approach called sexual risk reduction, but this approach, SRA, actually focuses on the best possible health outcomes and is a primary prevention method. We are also consistent with other public health strategies, as I mentioned before, in regards to risk behavior. This not only includes tobacco usage, but also includes bullying as well. In regards to SRA education, these things make SRA a viable option for schools. After 25 peer-reviewed studies reviewed SRA programs, they found that SRA programs whose students went through the entire program were more likely to delay sexual initiation, meaning the age at which they started having sex. They were also, if they were sexually active, more likely to discontinue or decrease sexual activity. So we see students return to a more healthy option in regards to the risk associated with sex. Also, these students were no less likely to use a condom than a student that had gone through any other type of programming. And in the last 20 years, abstinence has increased amongst teenagers by over 28%. So does SRA education work? Absolutely. And it's also a viable option. So in regards to SRA programs, what makes ours unique? Well, with LifeGuard, we come from a nonprofit organization, meaning that we don't make any money off of the choices that our students make. We have a strong history in Central Texas, being around for about 30 years, and the partnerships that we have in schools lead them to bring us back into programs year after year after year. We also strive to have medically accurate information because we own our own curriculum. We're able to go in and make updates annually, which means that we have the most relevant and up-to-date information. We're also sensitive to your family values. Whenever we poll parents, most would say they appreciate us being in the classroom because our message and what we communicate also align with what they're saying at home to their students, which is that they do not want them to be engaged in sexual activity at this time. We are also a politically neutral organization, meaning that we don't take a stand on any of the controversial issues surrounding sex. We communicate the facts and we leave opinions for other people. We also identify with teenagers today, again, by being relevant and being in the classrooms. Most of our speakers are involved in youth development outside of the classroom in extracurricular activities via coaching or even small group settings. We strive to be inclusive with our material, meaning that we don't identify or separate anyone who of minority status or otherwise. All of our information is relevant to every age group and every background of people. We also build strong relationships with teachers, parents, school nurses, and administration. In addition to going into the classroom to be able to teach, we continue to have conversations with teachers in regards to what are they seeing in the classroom. We ask teachers and students, what are the relevant risks that are facing young people today. We also have exceptional speakers who have a background in public speaking prior to becoming a speaker for LifeGuard. So those are some of the things that make our program unique. Let's talk about today's agenda. Today, we will discuss sexual health today and what is going on in the world around us. We also will review the curriculum and give tips and tools for parents because sexual health may be different from what you learned while you were in school. The curricula builds in your district. Whenever we get feedback from a district and they communicate to us a concern, we are able to work together with districts in order to make sure that we have the most relevant information. So let's get started with sexual health today. Let's sit down and think about the first time that you had a conversation with your parent or caregiver about sex. You probably got the talk. Well, we discovered that the talk is not actually sufficient in and of itself because there must be a continual conversation between students because they need continuous information that is developmentally appropriate. To communicate about what is developmentally appropriate and how awkward it can be moving through those conversations, we have a video between a parent and some younger children, and then we'll move forward with our discussion after that video.
Today we're going to be talking about how babies are made.
What does Melody know about making babies?
They're made out of water.
Yeah, they are made out of water.
How did Daddy and Mommy make you?
Magic.
Magic?
You fried me on a pan.
He fried you on a pan? I cooked you in my stomach? Or on the pan?
On a pan.
Melody, when two adults want to have a child, they have to have
Work
sex.
together. Work together.
Work
They
together.
have to work together, yes.
It's called
In order
making
to-
love or intercourse or
SEX.
the sex word, and it's nothing bad. It's what Mommy and Daddy did to have you. Remember I told you Mommy makes a potion, Daddy makes a potion.
Stir me.
I stir you up, and then Mommy drinks it. Well, that's not how babies are made.
What makes me a man and what makes Mom a woman?
You have bigger hands in her. You're tall.
What about our body, our body parts? How are
Yeah.
men and women different?
Man and woman are different because we have different reproductive organs. And in order to create and continue the cycle of life, we have to have intercourse.
How did your Tia Alice have her baby?
She came out of her butt.
Her butt? Okay. No, she didn't come out of the butt.
It came out of her vagina.
That's weird.
See this pocket?
Yep.
Okay. The pocket is the vagina. Okay? And in order to have a child, Daddy has to put his penis in the pocket. Do you understand?
Ew.
Yeah, you're gonna look at the world a lot different now.
And boys have a penis?
This is so fun.
Well, that was a pretty awkward conversation that those parents had. I remember conversations myself when multiple guardians set me down, whether it was my mother or my grandmother, and my grandmother simply, her sex talk was, you can get pregnant from kissing. And that was her way of communicating to me that there's something that's going to happen as a result of sexual activity. But she didn't necessarily give me the details about what sex actually was. However awkward it may feel or be for a parent to have that conversation, it is important to communicate with students because they have questions and they want to know. So what can we tell them? Before we get into the details of what you can say, I want you to be confident that your students are actually listening to you. When asked who or what influenced their decisions about sex the most, more teens cited their parents than any other influence. So they are listening and they are making decisions based on what you say. So, who or what is most influential in regards to teens' sexual choices? We know that the most influential is their parents, but how does it break down when we compare to other people, such as their friends? Well, it depends on the age group. As you can see from this chart here, our younger teens are most influenced by their parents, over half of them. As they get into the upper ages of 16 to 19-year-old, although the parents' influence does increase by about 20%, it's still more than any other category. So they are listening to you and making decisions based off of what you say. So if we know that the second most influential party to a teen's decision making is their friends, that's all the more reason to know who their friends are. And so some of those lower categories, the third highest categories, is simply they don't know. They may or may not yet have made a decision about sex and haven't thought through those voices that they've been listening to or hearing. So I would encourage you to speak to your students and encourage you to speak to them often. So let's think about what is happening. If teens are listening to their parents and making decisions based off of that, how effective are these conversations? Well, about 89% of parents say that they do talk to their teenagers about sex. However, only 71% of teens actually recall such conversations. And so I'm sure that you can think of a certain thing that you have to tell your students over and over again. How many times do I have to tell you not to leave your shoes on the floor when you come into the house? Put them right on the mat and we're set. You have to be repetitive. You may have to remind them to do their homework, to take out the trash. You say these things over and over and over again. The same thing has to be true in regards to conversations about sex, because although you are speaking, there's a lot of things that may be competing for your attention. And so they do need to hear your voice often, even if they shrug or complain or whine. Again, they're listening to you. So if students are listening to their parents, what should parents be saying? Well, it depends on what we are facing in regards to sexual activity. We said that the landscape of sex has changed, and so let's talk about the state of affairs today. In regards to sexual activity today, over the course of time, we've seen that the pregnancy rate for teen births is continuing to decrease comparatively to recent years. That has continued to be the case for over the last decade, and this used to be the primary concern in regards to teen sexual activity. However, teens may be becoming less sexually active, but the news is a bit more challenging than that. Although teen birth rates are decreasing, teen STI rates are actually increasing. And so when we talk about teenagers engaging in sexual activity, our focus is not just on pregnancy, but also on STIs. An STI is a sexually transmitted infection. You may have heard the term STD, which is a sexually transmitted disease. The infections lead to the diseases. And no matter which term you use, it's an epidemic. So, one out of how many Americans do you all believe have the viral, incurable infection, genital herpes? It's around 45 to 50 million people. And if you are answering that question aloud or in a poll, you'll find out that that's about 1 out of 8 Americans. The next question, true or false? Nearly all sexually active Americans will contract HPV at some point in their lives. HPV is the human papillomavirus. Unfortunately, this is true. Most Americans will contract HPV at some point in their lives, and we go into detail with students about what HPV is and why it's so common. It is the most common STI in our country that's contracted by skin-to-skin contact, and it's highly asymptomatic. With this being the reality, we need to help students think about how their experience will be different, maybe than what their parents experience. So in regards to how common STIs are, there's approximately how many new cases of STIs each year? Not thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but 20 million new cases each and every year. And half of those cases are reported in teens and young adults. Teens and young adults actually only make up 27% of the sexually active population. So 27% of people are getting 50% of the STIs. This is largely disproportionate. And again, this is an epidemic amongst this age group. In fact, 2 out of 5 sexually active female teens will have an STI at any point during their high school career. Why is this so common for teenagers? Why is this an epidemic amongst the youngest population and the smallest percentage of people having sex? Well, the reason for that is because teens are at higher risk than contracting STIs than any other population. The reason for that is because of 2 categories of risk. The first category is body risk, and the second category is choice risk. So let's talk about that. A teen's immune system is still developing up until their mid-20s, around 25. So if they're exposed to an infection, they're more likely to contract it than they would later in life. Secondly, their anatomy is also still developing. The teen cervix is small and thin. Think about a single sheet of paper compared to multiple sheets of paper. You know that the single sheet of paper is more likely to rip, tear, or break. The same is true for a teen cervix. It's more susceptible to allowing STIs to come in because the skin is more permeable, or the tissue is more permeable in that area. The other reason that teens are more likely to contract an STI is because of multiple sexual partners or early onset, which we'll see a graph on in just a moment. This is because of the choices that teens are making in regards to with whom they're having sex and when they're having sex. Another reason that teens are more likely to get an STI is because of what we call serial monogamy. Teenagers typically will have sex with their partners, but they will have multiple partners in a shorter time frame. They can be dating their partner this 9 weeks, and next 9 weeks they have a new partner. And so they may have 3 to 4 different partners in the course of a school year. If they're having sex with these partners, that increases the likelihood of them actually getting an STI. The next choice is high-risk sexual partners. A high-risk sexual partner is someone who may be using intravenous drugs or someone who's under the age of 25 because they're more susceptible to getting an STI as well. Lastly, teens are more likely to contract an STI because of risky sexual practices. Risky sexual practices refers to the fact that teens may not be using condoms consistently and correctly, and also they may be engaging in other risky sexual practices. Throughout school, I had the sex talk in 5th grade, 8th grade, and 10th grade. Unfortunately, at that time, we didn't have an understanding of the difference between vaginal sex and other types or definitions of sex. So teens try to avoid vaginal sex because they feel like if we're not doing what it takes to make a baby, it's not sex. What they fail to realize is that other types of sex, such as oral sex or anal sex, are more risky in regards to contracting STIs because those areas of skin are more susceptible to infection. So it is true that all teens are more likely to get STIs, but that's especially true for girls. In regards to girls, they have more skin area that is exposed during a sexual encounter. Again, thinking about this cervix and the anatomy in that area, they are more likely to contract an STI than their male counterparts. So we do see higher cases or instances of STIs amongst girls. It doesn't mean that the boys don't carry STIs, but girls are more susceptible to infection. And any gender can be asymptomatic and not know that they have an infection. So what about sexual imagery today? If we know that teens are more likely to contract STIs, what is the media communicating about sexual behavior? Well, they're communicating a lot in many different areas. We see sexual imagery and movies and music and TV shows and books on billboards. And there is the truth that even video games depict sexual behavior or sexual expression. And so, if they're being inundated with these messages, what are the messages communicating? Well, sexual content is prevalent in mainstream media and appears in approximately 85% of mainstream films and 82% of television programs. And we know that we live in a day and age where we are able to stream and have access to these movies more readily, and they're more available. Although this is not new because we saw it in the 80s, it is even more prevalent in music videos, where the most frequent portrayals of sex are through suggestive dancing, sexual objectification, and self-touching. More frequently, there's more frequent pornography consumption, and that has been associated with permissive sexual attitudes, such as a greater acceptance of casual sex or extramarital sex. Now, this isn't speaking to morals and values, but statistically, someone is more likely to contract an STI outside of a marital relationship and through casual sex by having multiple sexual partners again. And so we have to think about what causes people to think about sex more casually and not from a health perspective. Because they may not be thinking about sex from a health perspective, if they hear about sex via songs and references to sex that are degrading or objectifying, it will influence what they think about sexual activity. And so it is important for both health educators and parents to be countering these messages. So let's talk about the curriculum. In order to address sex from a health perspective, I'm going to take the time today to review with you what we actually talk about, which is probably why you tuned in today. You want to know, what are we actually saying to your students in the classroom? Well, we first go over a set of ground rules. For 6th through 8th graders, we communicate to them that we want to hear from them, so we encourage them to ask questions and to limit their side conversations. We do focus on the fact that we use medically accurate terms, so we don't use slang terms inside of our presentations, and we get them comfortable with using those correct terminology. We want to make sure that it is a safe and productive environment, and to do that, we have to make sure that each and every student is on board with communicating in the most respectful way possible. We do our best to answer questions based on what is approved for that year, so if it's not covered, we don't discuss it. We do warn students if we have behavioral issues that we will address it, and we do our best to try not to remove them from the classroom. We do want to keep the environment safe. And so we go through, we have 6th, 7th, and 8th grade presentations, and then we also have an all-encompassing high school presentation. In each and every grade level, we discuss the definition of sex, both medically and legally. And then in 6th and 7th grade, we discuss puberty. We review pictures of the human anatomy and go on from there. In 8th grade, in addition to discussing we don't discuss puberty and anatomy, but we jump right into the definition of sex in regards to the legal issues surrounding it. We do show pictures of STIs in both 8th grade and high school. However, in 8th grade, we only show 3 pictures, and they're all oral pictures. In high school, we show pictures, anatomical pictures of STDs and some of the consequences to help students understand a more realistic perspective. Before we show any pictures, there's an eye that pops on the screen to make sure that students are comfortable with what's coming next. After our discussion on STIs and STDs, we move into the pregnancy and the fetal development process. We discuss this in each and every grade level, with increasing our level of depth as we increase the grade levels. We do review contraceptives. We don't discuss how to use contraceptives, but we do discuss the human reality rate of if someone uses it as a risk reduction method. We then go on to discuss abstinence, and you'll see some of that a little bit later. And then we discuss healthy relationships through either boundaries, goal setting, holistic health, or peer pressure. So high school presentation is the most extensive presentation that we have. And so today I'm going to give you insight on what some of those things that we discuss are. So like I said, in 6th and 7th grade, we do go into the human anatomy. And so here is a picture of the female and male reproductive organs that we show. We have borrowed these pictures from the Medical Institute. And so this image appears on the screen. We go into depth about labeling the different parts, and just so that you are aware and we're all on the same page on how we're communicating to students, we point out that there's 3 openings for a female in the genital area: the anal opening, the vaginal opening, and the opening to the uterus. In the ovaries is where an egg will be released each month after a female goes through puberty. 1 egg will be released and travel through the fallopian tube into the uterus, where if no fertilization happens, that egg will then break apart, as well as the uterine lining will shed, and all of that will come out of the woman's uterus through the vaginal canal. The breaking away of the uterine lining will happen between a period of 3 to 5 days, and that process is a woman's period. That tissue and lining that is coming off is made up of blood and nutrients that would have been supplied to a fertilized egg. If fertilization does occur, it will typically happen through vaginal sex, where a penis is inserted into the vaginal canal. Sperm is released in the fluid of semen. It travels through the uterus, and typically fertilization will happen in the fallopian tube, where the sperm will implant into the egg. The fertilized egg will travel down to the uterus and implant on the uterine lining and begin to grow through different stages of development, which we do go into. We then talk about the male reproductive organs, making sure to point out what is similar and what is different between the two. What is different is that males only have 2 openings in their genital area: the anal opening and the urethral opening. So both urine come out of the bladder, as well as sperm come out of the vas deferens, which is the tube here in the urethra. Sperm are made in the testes and stored in the epididymis, where they will then travel during an ejaculation. We do point out to students that there are bones here in this area, the pubic bone and the tailbone, but there are no bones in the penis. So what happens when a male has an erection is that there is an increase of blood flow to this area, and it causes the penis to expand and to become more firm. This is not something that a male can control or turn off or turn on with the switch of a button. It may be a result of blood flow, but it also can be a result of sexual arousal. We point out to students that the testes is inside of skin called the scrotum, which helps with temperature regulation. And so when it is cold, the skin will constrict and bring the testes closer to the body. And when it is warm, it will release the testes away from the body. Temperature regulation is important in regards to sperm storage to make sure that those sperm are viable. So we go into some of those details as well as others when we talk about the human anatomy and point out some of those differences there. In 6th grade, we do separate the students by gender. This is to help them be able to ask questions and feel comfortable asking very specific questions, because we do go more in depth into the menstrual cycle in 6th grade. In 7th grade and higher, we do keep a co-ed environment because it helps them to respect each other's experiences, and it allows for them to be more appropriate in the classroom when they're regulated by their peers. So this is what we discuss in 6th and 7th grade. We also go into talking about sex. And so after we've pointed out the differences that happen in the male and reproductive anatomy, we go straight into defining sex. After puberty occurs and the differences happen there, we ask them, these hormones, the sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, are responsible for an increase of the hormones in the body that then will have an occurrence of different things happening, such as fatty tissue will grow in the breast area. For females, they will develop breasts. Their hips and the pelvis will widen. Boys may experience a growth of hair on their faces. Their testes and their penis will enlarge as well. And because of the rise in hormones, they may become more interested in sexual activity. And that is where we just ask about the definition of sex. We use the dictionary definition of sex. Webster's dictionary defines sex as simply intercourse. Intercourse is physical sexual contact between individuals that involves the genitalia of at least one person. The word individuals is intentionally not gender specific because we are here for all students. Anyone who has a body and that body come into contact with one other person's genitals is engaged in sexual activity from both a medical and legal perspective. So we in 8th grade and high school, we also discuss 5 other definitions of sex to make sure that they have a more well-rounded understanding of what we're talking about when we discuss sex. So we give the definition and just state very matter-of-factly that vaginal sex is penetration by a sexual partner of the vagina with the penis. Oral sex is mouth to genital contact. Anal sex is penetration by a sexual partner of the anus or the rectum. Mutual genital stimulation is stimulation by a sexual partner of the genitals. And outer course is stimulation of the genitalia but does not involve penetration of the vagina or the anus. So again, we go into these definitions because from a medical and legal perspective, it is important to understand. From a legal perspective, or a medical perspective, any of these type of interactions can lead to a sexually transmitted infection. From a legal perspective, the age of consent in the state of Texas is 17 years old. In regards to the age of consent, one thing for you all to be aware of is the fact that there is something called the Affirmative Defense Clause. This clause states that if 2 individuals are within 3 years of the age of consent, and 3 years of each other's age, their lawyer may use a defense in court to either remove or reduce the consequences of having sex with the minor, which means that if a 17-year-old engages in sex with a 14-year-old, they can use the affirmative defense clause in court. Okay? But obviously, a parent or guardian or anyone who becomes aware of the situation may report it to the authorities and have it escalated to go to a courtroom setting. So when we communicate this to our 8th graders and high school students, we make sure to communicate also to them that, one, if they're under the age of 18 living in their parents' household, that's whose rules that they go by. But also, if they are under the age of consent or their partner is under the age of consent, it is technically illegal in the same way that smoking cigarettes is illegal for anyone under the age of 21. So we go into that. We also discuss the legality of sexting. So sexting is sending and or receiving sexually explicit images via mobile telephone. So also in the state of Texas, it is illegal for anyone to send unsolicited pictures, no matter what age that person is. So if they're under the age of 18, it may be considered child pornography. We communicate this to students, and we also make recommendations for students not to sex because they don't know where that image will end up. So we not only give them the facts, but we also give them some real life recommendations about how that may play out for them. Another thing that we discuss with students in regard to STIs and the definition of sex is that many STIs are asymptomatic, meaning they don't show any signs of infection. So what that can look like in real life is someone has had oral sex, they haven't had vaginal sex, and they don't have any symptoms of an STI, but then they go on to engage in sexual activity with another person, and that they give that person or transmit that STI to another person. So we make sure students are able to understand that all the definitions of sex that we discuss have both medical and legal implications as well. So let's talk about sexually transmitted infections for a moment. We discussed 3 different bacterial STIs, 3 to 4 different viral STIs, and 1 parasitic STI. Bacterial STIs are curable with antibiotics, and we discussed syphilis, gonorrhea, and chlamydia. We also discuss viral STIs such as herpes, HPV, and HIV, and AIDS. We make sure students are able to understand the difference between HIV and the STD, which is AIDS, and the prognosis of them contracting that infection. Trichomoniasis, the parasitic STI, we discuss the prevalency of these STIs, the possible symptoms, and symptoms that don't sound like they come from STIs. So we make sure that students are aware of the fact that even if STIs do show symptoms, something like a fever or sore throat that may be the symptoms of syphilis may not be any indication that the person has an STI, which can then lead to other consequences. And so we discuss that with students as well. Now, again, let's go back to why we discuss with students STIs, because we know that if they engage in sexual activity while they're a teenager, they're more likely to have a greater risk as a result. And so we discuss with them the potential of delaying intercourse or the age of sexual debut. And so here you will see a chart of sexual debut. So on average, if someone starts having sex around 15 or 18, even if they wait to the age of consent, on average, they're going to have about 7 partners over the course of their lifetime. If they delay sexual activity until they're out of the high risk category, above the age of 25, on average, they'll have less than 5 partners in the course of their lifetime. Why does that matter? Why does the number of partners make a difference? Well, here, it leads to exposure. This is a sexual exposure chart that is found in some high school textbooks. We talk about delaying sexual activity because each year that they delay, they have a lower exposure. So thinking about the 15 to 18-year-olds who have an average of 7 partners, which you see on the left side of your screen here, if every person has the same number of partners as the reader, that person with 7 partners will be exposed to about 127 people in their lifetime. If they're able to delay sexual activity until after 25 years old, they may have on average 3 partners. 3 partners would lead to about 7 people that they've been potentially exposed to. We know that delay is a healthier option in regards to when teenagers start engaging in sexual activity. And we make sure that we communicate this across the board. Now, the exposure chart and the age of sexual debut is something that we communicate to our 8th graders and our high school students. So then we shift from talking about STIs into our topic of pregnancy and the fetal development process. So in regards to teen pregnancy, we do communicate that about half of teenage mothers receive a high school diploma by the age of 22 years old, and only about 2% have a college degree. We communicate that being a teen parent does make it more challenging to accomplish certain goals. Part of the reason for that is the lack of support from a 2-parent home. 8 out of 10 teen fathers don't marry the mother of their child. And children who live apart from their father, no matter the age of the parent, are 5 times more likely to live beneath the poverty line than children who live with both parents. Teen fathers who are not present in the home pay less than $800 a year for child support, often because they themselves do not have enough money to support themselves. And so we communicate some of these statistics to the older age groups to help them understand what happens as a result of a pregnancy when someone is beneath the age of consent and essentially younger than 22 years old. Okay. Other statistics in regards to teen pregnancy is in 2018, we saw about 179 teenage births. That number has decreased by about 7% the year prior. And so we do see a continual decrease of teen pregnancy, but the rate is still about 1 teen birth every 3 minutes in the United States. Approximately 30% of Americans will become pregnant before the age of 20, and most teen pregnancies were unintended, which means they were not prepared for the financial responsibilities, the social implications of, or any of those other holistic health items that may come out of the sexual encounter. So for high school students, we do communicate with them to dispel the myths that they believe in regards to teen pregnancy. Because some teens do believe if I have sex, but I engage in sex this way, such as having sex when a female's on her period or making her urinate after she uses the bathroom, then we don't have to worry about pregnancy. So we speak with them about how to dispel some of these myths and help them understand that sexual activity can lead to a teen pregnancy. Then we discussed the idea of safe sex. There's a difference between safe sex and safer sex. Often we hear the term safe sex in regards to using a condom or contraceptives. Somewhere in around the 1980s, the nation increased their use of contraceptives because of a campaign that we developed around the question of what can someone wear to decrease their risk. However, the word safe implies that there's no risk involved. And if someone is using a condom, there is a risk involved. In the same way that if someone is using a seatbelt, there's a possibility of injury in a car accident. However, it's less likely. The seatbelt doesn't prevent injury, but it does reduce it. And so we help students understand that we really need to use different terminology. When we talk about safe, we're talking about avoiding or eliminating risk. When we talk about safer, we're talking about reducing risk if someone chooses to engage in the activity. So safer sex is using a condom, but safe sex is not having sex at all. So if we ask the question, what can someone wear to have safe sex? The answer wouldn't be condoms. The answer will be something entirely different. And LifeGuard created a campaign around that very idea. The answer is found in this video.
Are you tired of worrying about unplanned teen pregnancies? Are you afraid of contracting an incurable sexually transmitted disease? Well, worry no more. Now there's pants. When worn properly, pants can protect you from all of the unwanted and unpleasant side effects of sex, including but not limited to HPV, chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, genital herpes, HIV, having a baby, ruining your reputation, and more. Pants come in a variety of shapes, sizes, and colors, and they're easy to use. Pants are amazing. Just listen to these real pants wearers.
Thanks to pants, I know I won't end up a teen parent.
Pants keep me safe from sexually transmitted diseases. And they keep my legs warm. Thanks, pants.
Try pants, they're amazing. And now available as shorts. Pants will not work if used improperly, and by that we mean if you take them off. Pants do not protect against wedgies. If you start to notice an odor coming from your pants, it's probably time to wash them. To learn more about what keeping your pants on can do for you, visit our website at iheartpants.org.
This is the video that we use with students to communicate that wearing pants is safe sex. And depending on your sense of humor, you might have chuckled a few times during that video. Students love the video. They love our I Heart Pants campaign. And in some districts, we have I Heart Pants material available for students for free as a result of participating in the presentation, to help them remember that the truth is, if something's safe, there's no risk involved. And so when we talk about safer sex, the idea of reducing the risk involved with sexual activity, we do communicate about contraceptives, but we communicate about contraceptives from a point of education. So we go over the definition. A contraceptive is a device or drug that's primary purpose is to prevent pregnancy. It is separated into two primary categories. The first category of contraceptive is a barrier method contraceptive. A barrier method is something like the male condom or a female condom. A non-barrier method is something like a birth control pill or a birth control pill which is taken orally, or an injection that can be taken in the fatty tissue of the arm. We do communicate with students that contraceptives only provide risk reduction, not risk elimination for pregnancy. And only barrier methods actually offer any potential effect on STIs themselves. And so we make sure to communicate that with students so that they understand that there's a difference. And when we communicate about contraceptives, we communicate specifically about condoms. In regards to condoms, they have an 87% effectiveness rate in regards to pregnancy with typical use. That means in the course of a year, 100 couples who were having sex regularly, about 12% of them would experience a pregnancy. Studies have proven that consistent and correct use of the male latex condom can decrease the risk of HIV. This is because of how HIV is transmitted. HIV is primarily transmitted through bodily fluid, and the STIs that are transmitted through bodily fluid, such as seminal fluid or vaginal fluid or fluid from the anus, wearing a condom does decrease the risk of these STIs. However, STIs like herpes or HPV can still be contracted even if someone is using a condom consistently and correctly. So, we know that condoms can reduce the risk of STIs, but are teenagers using them? Well, about 46% of sexually active high school students reported that they did not use a condom the last time that they had sex. Let's go back to how many times we have to reiterate to teens to do something or remind them to do something over and over again. Condoms are only effective at reducing the risk of STIs if they're being used, but almost half of teenagers are not using condoms. So we make sure to communicate from a risk reduction method the importance of using a male condom if someone chooses to engage in sexual activity. Now, we don't just talk about STIs and pregnancy and condom usage. We also talk about sex from a holistic perspective. Because if someone is choosing to engage in sexual activity, they have to ask themselves questions that not only deal with whether or not I will get pregnant and have a physical consequence, but they also have to make a decision in regards to their mental health. Teens are not usually making a logical decision about sex as it relates to their ignorance about the person or about sex itself. Spiritually, this relates to someone's values of honesty or ethics and respecting one another and allowing them to have their own boundaries. Will I be honest with my parents about what I'm thinking in regards to sexual activity? We also discuss with students what are some emotional effects that someone may experience in regards to having sex. We don't communicate that sex is bad, so we let students tell us what are some things that you think people may feel as a result of engaging in sexual activity. They may be happy or excited or nervous, embarrassed or ashamed. And so there's a holistic health that has to be considered when teenagers think about sexual activity. And we talk about this in our 7th grade and 7th through high school curriculum and varying levels of appropriateness. So after we discuss sex from a holistic perspective, one of the things that we talk about is if we can wear a condom to reduce the physical risk of sex, what can we wear to reduce the mental risk of sex or to reduce the risk of how it may affect someone at work or on their job? There's nothing to wear in those instances. And so someone has to make a decision about when they have sex and with whom they have sex, which leads us to talking about abstinence. The definition of abstinence is refraining from the use or indulgence of food, stimulants, or sexual activity. We talk about abstinence in a way that normalizes it, not only related to sex, but also other areas of their lives. I am someone who has a gluten intolerance, and so I abstain from eating gluten for health reasons. Some people avoid stimulants such as alcohol because they're under the legal limit, or because they may have some medication that they're taking. So someone can be abstinent at any point in their life for any duration of time. And so we communicate this to students. For those students in our group who may be sexually active and need to move to a more healthy risk perspective, which is to not engage in the risk at all. So we talk about abstinence, we give the definition, but we also give abstinence facts. What does abstinence help someone to avoid? It helps someone to avoid the fear of STIs, the anxiety that they may have over pregnancy, because as a female is going through puberty, her period doesn't come on the same day. And even when she becomes an adult, that doesn't happen. So she may even skip a few months as her menstrual cycle is regulating. Having to have a conversation with their parents, that's pretty uncomfortable. The fear of getting caught, or even the negative emotions that are could be associated with sexual activity, such as shame, guilt, and fear. Then we go into the abstinence facts. The fact is that abstinence offers 100% risk avoidance from STIs and pregnancy. if someone is not engaged in sexual activity, they don't have to be concerned about a pregnancy. We also discuss with students the 5 ways that someone can get an STI. So outside of sexual activity, someone can get an STI through pregnancy, meaning that their mother was pregnant and passed the STI along to the fetus, or the birthing process can lead to an STI. They may get an STI through dirty needles, such as tattoo needles or piercing needles, if they're not going to a licensed professional who is changing the needles, or they can get an STI through infected blood. So we do communicate these 5 different ways that someone can get an STI. And as we say, the primary way that someone gets an STI is through exposure during sexual activity, which is why abstinence is risk avoidance from both STIs and pregnancy. Over 60% of high school students have never had sexual intercourse. I want to sit with that for a moment because many people think that that number is higher. But the fact is that even though teens may be discussing sexual activity, many of them are not having sex. We communicate this again because it is a social norm. It is normal for someone in high school or middle school to never have had sex before. We communicate that to teenagers because we want them to know that it is a normal experience and they can benefit from positive peer pressure. But for those teens that did engage in sexual activity, one study found that over 2/3 of them, over 66%, wish that they had waited longer. They wish that they had information that they had later, or something happened in the relationship that they were not comfortable with. And so we communicate these abstinent facts to the different grade levels to make sure that they understand the implications of having sex and that there's more to consider than just the physical choices. In regards to some statistics based on the different districts, most of our districts have 80% of students who are abstinent. Either they're delaying sexual activity until marriage or they're delaying sexual activity until later. And so, again, we are reinforcing the values of our community with our program when we communicate about abstinence to teenagers. Let's go into making it realistic. We recognize that abstinence is not, a dream or a desire or a clothing that someone can put on and take off. It is a goal that someone has. And any goal that's achievable has steps to get there. So how does a student live an abstinent lifestyle? Well, they get around other people who are also living an abstinent lifestyle. Peer pressure works and it can be positive. They focus on their future goals and activities that they're involved in today. Being involved with activities reduces the likelihood of engaging in any risk behavior. Focusing on school or having a positive mentor. Establishing healthy boundaries and boundaries early on. Students who have a volunteer opportunity or a job are also less likely to engage in sexual activity and less likely to engage in other risk behaviors. Some of these things are a part of what is known as the 40 developmental assets. There were studies that were done that found that if students had internal and external supports that were available to them via their community, such as being involved, via adult support, or their ability to believe in themselves, which is something that is intrinsic, they are more likely to be successful and less likely to engage in any risky behavior. So, talking about boundaries. In each and every grade level, we discuss what healthy boundaries are, and we discuss the purposes of boundaries. There are 4 different purposes of boundary. The first purpose of a boundary is to provide protection. Just like the guardrails on the side of the highway, boundaries are limitations on what is and is not acceptable to keep us in the safe operational range. Boundaries are also the purpose is to help us to feel comfortable. Whenever I go to the movie theater, when the movie theaters are open, I am very grateful for the armrest in between me and the stranger that I'm sitting next to for 2 hours. It helps me to feel comfortable. Boundaries also help people to maintain safety, going back to that idea of protection. Boundaries also give a sense of freedom. So many people don't think about freedom. When they think about boundaries, they think about what they're not able to do. But if I have a boundary on what time I go to sleep, I'm 11 years old in sixth grade, I believe is how old an 11-year-old is. And my parents said, you know what? Your curfew is 10 o'clock. Curfew means don't be outside of your room past 10 o'clock. You need to have some downtime, and the screens are all in the kitchen. Well, because of that boundary or limitation on how long I can stay up and be involved in digital devices, I now have the freedom to get 8 hours or 6 hours plus of sleep, which then gives me the ability the next day to wake up refreshed and rejuvenated potentially. So boundaries actually are able to accomplish something for me. The last and fourth purpose of a boundary is to teach others how to respect us. So a student that is able to communicate what is and is not okay for them is them telling someone, hey, this is what I need from you, not only to feel comfortable and safe, but also to be respected. So we review boundaries from that point of view. We ask them to share with us boundaries that they have in their family, and they share things such as not being home alone, locking the doors, and not being in rooms with certain type of people at certain time frames. And so we put back into the context what is their experience at home and what are the expectations that they have. The earlier a person starts with establishing boundaries, the easier it is to keep those boundaries versus having to backtrack. And so when we talk about tips for parents, we'll talk a little bit about how to sit down and have some of those conversations. Another aspect of healthy relationships or influences to having sex that we talk about is peer pressure, right? And so in regards to peer pressure, 87% of 13 to 16-year-olds have never had sex before. And so oftentimes teenagers and young people are thinking about peer pressure from a negative aspect. But think about sports games. When I'm on the field or on the court and I'm at the home, I have my home court advantage. The reason it's called an advantage is not only because I'm comfortable, but because there are a bunch of people in the stands yelling my name, cheering me on, telling me to run faster or to, pass the ball. They're involved with my experience and they're putting pressure on me to achieve something that is positive. Resisting the negative peer pressure and taking advantage of the positive can help students navigate sexual activity and the things that may influence them to engage in sex. A lot of times, teens, if they're willing to cross one boundary, they're willing to cross another one. And we see that be absolutely true in regards to the usage of drugs and alcohol. More than 1/3 of sexually active teens and young adults reported that alcohol or drugs influenced them to do something sexual. 72% of teens who use drugs have had sex. And many teens report that they were using alcohol or were even intoxicated during their first sexual experience. As adults, we're more familiar with the nuances or chemical reactions in regards to sexual activity. We discuss with our high school students the reality that alcohol and drugs, depending on which kind someone is using, may decrease someone's inhibition and increase it may increase someone's willingness to take risk, but decrease their reasoning skills. Feelings of pleasure and arousal increase with alcohol usage as well. So if someone is more willing to take risk and things feel good and they're not able to think through things logically, they're more likely to engage in the risky behavior of sexual activity. So we talk about intoxication from a legal standpoint and that being a difficult choice. So after we discuss drugs and alcohol, we move into discussing another area of an influence to engaging in sexual activity, which is love. Many people, when we ask when is the best time to engage in sexual activity, they say, when it's the right person and someone feels like they're in love. But my emotional feelings of love may differ from my choice to have sex with someone. And so we discuss with them what are the 4 different definitions of types of love in the Greek language. There is family love, such as a mother's protection over her child, or a mother or father's provision for their children. We talk about sex from the perspective of friendship, such as phileo, right? That's brotherly love, where I tell my friends that I love them because I'm willing to help them on their homework when they're struggling. We also talk about love from the perspective of unconditional love, which is agape. Most times we see this in a marital situation where unconditionally, no matter what happens between us, I am making a choice to be committed to this person. We also talk about love from the aspect of sexual infatuation or desire for something. And so we help students to be able to differentiate between what is that infatuation type of love and what are those other 3 categories of love. And when someone says that they love another person, which one of those types of love is most appropriate for sexual activity. And so then we discuss with students different steps to building a relationship. This is also in our 8th grade presentation. We use the analogy of sex being the icing on the cake. And here's a picture of cake so you can take a look at what that might look like. But what happens when you add icing to a cake before it's finished developing or it's finished cooling? The same thing that happens to a cake if we add icing prematurely can happen to a relationship if we add sex prematurely as well. The icing will it will soak into the cake, causing it to become dense and heavy, and the cake will crumble. The same thing is true of relationships. If someone chooses to engage in sexual activity before establishing whether or not this person respects my boundaries and myself personally, I just met them and we haven't started dating, the relationship may not last. We talk about this because when we talk about the 4 different variations of love, we ask students, what type of love do you want? That helps them set the precedent for what they're looking for in their future and what could happen if they engage in sexual activity. Communicating this idea helps them build upon the idea that they have of relationships and the value that they have there. Another activity that we have for 8th graders helps them understand what their choices can mean in real life. And so we go through a game called Spending Your Life, where they have 2 choices appear on the screen. One choice is cost a certain number of circles, and they're given 10 circles during the game. The other choice costs a different number of circles, and they're told to pick one choice during this set period of time. What they then find out is that after the game is over, whether they have more or less circles or no circles left at all, they could not go back and undo a past decision, and the same is true of real life. And every choice has a cost, and this cost can be more than anticipated. And so those are just some of the ways that we're able to bring back into reality how decision making can set them up for the future that they've chosen and decided for themselves. Here are some communication tools for parents. I know at this point we've talked about the curriculum and we've asked that you guys continue to have conversations with your students. And so the question may be, what does that look like? Here are a few tools. We're going to talk about making sure that there's exposure, openness, listening skills, comprehension, and acceptance. In regards to exposure, be sure to talk early and often. It's not just one big talk anymore. Because your students are influenced by what you tell them, let them know your values and attitudes about sex. Be clear and open about them, letting them know where you stand. Know your kids' friends and their parents. Who are your kids' who are your kids' weekday friends? The people that they hang out with at lunch and sit across from at the table and talk to, and who are their weekend friends? You probably know them a little bit better because you see them on a day-to-day basis, or you see them when they come over, or you hear them talking to them. Both types of friends are influencing them, and the most influence comes from those weekend friends. Knowing your your students' friends' parents can help know what types of conversations and attitudes that they have and whether or not they reinforce the values that you're trying to establish in your own student. Have access to the information in ways that you deem necessary. Know what your students are watching, reading, and doing online. Although they may gripe and complain, if you're consistent in those boundaries, they will respect them and appreciate them, although you may not hear about how much they appreciate it until years later. Some parents have boundaries of having a shared family computer or having a curfew for devices. You establish what's appropriate for your home. Openness. Create an atmosphere that welcomes open communication. Definitely be honest and turn conversations into opportunities. Often students will share things in ways that are informal, like sitting in the backseat of the car when they're not looking directly at you. They'll open up more about those things, and they'll often share about their friends versus actually telling you how they feel. Like if you turn a TV situation into a conversation, you could ask, what do you think your friends would say about this situation, or how do they feel? They feel more comfortable talking about their friends or a situation in third party than they may feel about themselves. Discourage early dating. Research shows that early dating is connected to early sexual activity. Each family needs to decide what early means for your family. It may be different based on the child. For some children, they mature faster than others, and you may feel a lot more comfortable with that child dating than another child. Make sure that they know what that expectation is early on, so that when it comes time for them to be interested in someone, they already have cued in the back of their head what is and is not acceptable for your family. Talk about the future and the opportunities that they do have. Talk about the future in ways that are positive, and also do some risk planning. For example, helping your students think through if they're in a situation that may be unsafe or uncomfortable, what options they have available. Whenever a student is able to visualize and practice worst case or less than best case scenarios, they're more likely to carry out those steps and be able to have a plan of action that they can see through. Also, make sure that you talk about opportunities that they do have, and let them know that it's okay if they're not in a relationship, and it's fine for you to monitor it if they are. Listening skills. Express your love and affection clearly and often. Sometimes we take for granted that they know that we love them. Think about yourselves and what you expect or need to hear or feel loved, and that may be different than your own child. Very quickly, we have the 5 love languages. That is how we show people that we care. This may be physical touch, such as a hug or a head rub. It could be quality time, such as we're sitting next to each other, watching a movie and talking about the movie, because it's the quality and not just the amount or duration of the time. There's also words of affirmation. Affirming that child. Some children need to hear and know that, hey, I'm proud of you. You may tell your coworkers, but them hearing it may make the biggest difference. Also, another love language is gifts. If there's a child that you have that is always asking you for something, and it's not things that they need, but maybe things that they want, they may be tugging on you to say, hey, make me feel valued. Even a little M&M could help. And lastly, they may have the love language of acts of service, meaning that they want you to do something for them. This was me when I was younger. I already knew how to tie my shoe and put on my clothes, but I often asked for help because I wanted someone to show me that they cared by taking the time to do something for me. Figure out what your kids' love language are and communicate that to them clearly. And listen to what they say and let them know that you are interested. We ask students to put away their devices and to look us in their eyes when we talk. But we have to ask ourselves the question, are we doing the same thing? When we listen openly, we encourage them to talk. And make sure that you have your poker face ready. Don't overreact to something that they say, even if it's not what you expected to hear. Sometimes they're just testing whether or not you will be open and what they call not judgmental. A man is deemed wise when he keeps his words to himself. No matter what he's thinking, the other person won't know. The same thing is true for your students. Give yourself a time out to react at a different time. Because when you set the playing field that this is even and open, you can tell me what you want to. Even if you have to come back and address it later, they'll be more willing to talk. Also, let them know that you expect courtesy and respect. even if there's something that they have to say that you disagree with. Again, setting those expectations means they're more likely to achieve them. And lastly, ask open-ended questions. This is the best way to get information. I have a friend who I cannot stand talking to whenever I'm not having a good day, because the way that they pose the questions makes it almost impossible for me to answer with an I don't know or a yes or a no. And my friend may ask a question like, what is it that I see going on with your face? Up. That means that I'm showing something, I'm expressing something, and they're asking me to put word to what it is that they see versus saying, are you upset? It's easy for me to say yes or no, and maybe some of it, no is just a little bit of the truth. When you ask open-ended questions, you're giving them the floor to share whatever they may be interested in sharing, and then you can delve deeper into that. Also, you need to take time to think about what your students don't know. And I'm saying you a lot, but I honestly mean we and us, because as adults involved in the lives of students, they are listening to all of us, but more importantly, they are listening to their parents. And what they don't know is these questions right here. How do I know if how do I know if I'm in love? What does that look like? How do I tell my boyfriend or girlfriend that I don't want to have sex? Is abstinence really an option? And what do we do if we are not having sex? Start thinking about how you want to answer so that they know your values and the guidance that you want to offer. Now let's talk about your past, because that may be in the back of your mind. What about it? Be honest. Be honest about your past in the way that is developmentally appropriate. It's okay to say, yes, I've had sex. But maybe when they get older, then you give them more details about how many partners you had, if that's okay for you. You may want to give the honest truth, but not necessarily the whole truth. And you can encourage them to do better. There is a difference between maturity and hypocrisy. If I was a drug addict or struggled with substance abuse, I wouldn't say, well, they might as well have done it too. So the same thing can be true in regards to sex. Just because I've made a decision doesn't mean that I've learned and have grown from it. And if I'm a single parent, I can model for my students what I want them to see, whether it's how soon or how many partners that they meet. Whenever we say one thing but do another, students see that, because more of what they listen to is through their eyes than their ears. In regard to your present, you can't behave one way and expect for your teens to behave another way. Now, that might sound accusatory, but we are human, and we may know the good to do and not do that very thing. And so having conversations with students to let them know the expectations is an influence, because studies show that parents' behaviors do influence the behaviors of their children. What you say will make a difference, and they will believe what they perceive is okay. So if they see it, they'll believe that it's fine. Make sure that you're making a difference and have boundaries with your students about what is and is not okay. The way that you can make a difference is by these several factors that can delay the onset of sexual activity. Strong parental engagement in students' lives. Letting them know that you're present, and them knowing you are present, means that you have eyes on them. And even when you're not looking, they're going to be thinking about what you could find out. Parental disapproval of adolescents having sex also delays the onset of sexual activity. When you're open and you set the boundaries about when they can be on the phone or how long or who can be over and what time, you're setting the stage for them to achieve the boundaries and standards that you have set, especially when they're healthy. This also reduces or delays the age of onset of sexual activity. Being connected to their school and having a sense of belonging leads to not only the delay of sexual activity, but also it leads to the avoidance of other risk behavior. When a student or a child feels connected to the community, it gives them social support in addition to the internal support of whether or not they believe in themselves and whether or not they're able to achieve. This is what you can do in their environment. Please do not feel out of control when we talk about your teens and their sexuality, because whether they are young teens such as 12 or older teens such as 17 or 18 years old, it is true that you make the biggest difference, and LifeGuard is here to align with your family values and reinforce those expectations. The social norm is that over 60% of students are not engaged in sexual activity, and over 80% of students in the LifeGuard program are choosing abstinence. And so we are here to support you. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and we have time after this presentation, please feel free to ask. Or you can find us online at www.lifeguard-tx.org. You can also find or follow us on social media at lifeguard_tx. That's on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And you may feel free to email us at lifeguardinfo@lifeguard-tx.org. Thank you so much for your time today and the opportunity to talk to you and be heard. Please take care.